Welcome to Bringing Life to Scholarship, a symposium series sponsored by the Herbert H. and Grace A. Dow College of Health Professions. I'm Dr. Peter Lubert and will be serving as moderator for today's presentation. If you're watching this presentation live on the web, you can email questions at any time during the presentation by clicking the Ask button on your screen. This and all previous presentations are archived and available online at www.cmich.edu. Today's presentation will be given by Dr. Mark Cwick. Dr. Cwick is a professor in the College of Health Professions here at the University of Michigan. He earned his Juris Doctorate and a Master's degree of Healthcare Administration at St. Louis University and a Bachelor of Science degree in Psychology at Wayne State University. Dr. Cwick is a fellow in the American College of Healthcare Executives and has over 20 years of healthcare administration experience. He has served in various healthcare organizations in capacities that include in-house legal counsel, vice president, and chief executive officer. Dr. Cwick is a licensed attorney in Michigan and in Illinois. He's authored many publications and presentations in healthcare-related forums and serves as a board member and of several professional and charitable organizations. Today's presentation will be Telemedicine, Legal, Economic, and International Issues. Dr. Cwick?
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. Well, I know that Peter is a true blue fan of University of Michigan, but just for the record, I'm here at Central Michigan University, and by the way, my wife is a graduate from the nursing program at University of Michigan. So when we were raising our children, they all learned the Go Blue mantra at a very early age. Of course, now Go Chips fits in there very nicely too. My presentation today is on telemedicine, and I'm looking at various legal and international aspects of that particular topic. Before I get into the meat of discussion, I would like to thank a number of individuals who have been very helpful, very encouraging, very instrumental to my research and my studies. First off, the folks at Virginia Commonwealth University, especially the director of the program, Dr. Ron Merrill, who is a surgeon, and also Azar Rafiq, a primary care physician working in that area, have been extremely helpful, and they've really pulled me into their family, so to speak, in the visits that I've had to Richmond, Virginia. Also, I had the opportunity as part of my sabbatical experience in 2005 to visit the UC Davis campus and to meet personally with Dean Tom Nesbitt, who is the director of their program. He also helped develop the large network that is existing in the state of California. And I would be amiss to not mention Barbara Johnston, Jana Katz, and Kathy Chorba. Wonderful, wonderful people who were very helpful in helping me to learn in a very first-hand way how the applications exist in telemedicine between specialists and various sites throughout the state. Peter Jacobson is a professor with a legal background at the University of Michigan, wrote a very important report that was funded by Robert Wood Johnson on this topic, and he came to a conclusion that was a bit different than I reached with my co-authors, and I'll be talking about that in just a little bit, and I'll explain why we reached a different sort of decision when we get to that point. Also, Rashid Bashur, who is the director of the telemedicine program for many, many years now at the University of Michigan, and just past editor of the premier journal Telemedicine and eHealth. I had a chance also to consult with a fellow by the name of Alan Goldberg, who is a telemedicine expert with the law firm of Goulston and Storrs. And then finally, here at Central Michigan University, I'd like to give special thanks to my primary clinical consultant and partner, Pat Cwick. I'd like to thank Dean Marvis Larry for supporting me on my sabbatical efforts. Also, all of my friends and colleagues here at the Herbert H. and Grace A. Dow College of Health Professions, and in our School of Health Sciences, and of course, in my home division, the Health Administration program. I'd like to start with a couple of quotes. First, from Tom Nesbitt, who is from UC Davis. He said, "If we discover the cure for cancer, but only half the people have access to it, did we discover the cure for cancer or half the cure?" It's an interesting question. This gets at the whole issue of access of patients to healthcare in our country and the role telemedicine has and will have in the future to help solve some of the access problems. Also, from Don Sundquist, who is the past governor of the Southern Governors Association, past chairman of the Southern Governors Association, and also at that time the governor of the state of Tennessee. This is a key quote pulled from an important report done in the 1990s by the Southern Governors Association. And you'll have an understanding why this is so key to my presentation in just a few minutes. He said, "While many southern states are making great strides individually in telemedicine, we must remember that we have far to go in order to fully reap the benefits of its extraordinary technological capabilities that transcend state lines." Okay, I have a definition here from the World Health Organization of telemedicine. And I have the various sections highlighted. Telemedicine, the use of information technology to deliver medical services and information from one location to another. So when we look at information technology, we look at various aspects. You have the generation of digital information, the processing of that information, the storing, the transporting, the displaying, and the management of digital information. And here's a picture of a fantastic telesurgery suite. I think this is really kind of interesting for a number of reasons, and if I may, I'd just like to point certain things out here in this suite. First off, you'll notice that the surgeon is already scrubbed up. So it looks like he left this area, which is the actual operatory, and came in here to operate equipment. And I was at Virginia Commonwealth University. I had the opportunity to look at the actual equipment, the controls, and to actually manipulate it a little bit. And it's really pretty fantastic. You can move something like, say, 3 inches, and it may well translate wherever the equipment is at the other end of it all, to fractions of a millimeter, for example. So in terms of the preciseness of the work that's being done, it's absolutely remarkable. And when you think about surgeries where there's always the fear of nicking an artery or some other catastrophe during the procedure, I can see where a number of surgeons once trained with this technology would feel very comfortable with using this equipment, even though they're only literally a few feet away from where the patient is. You can see there's a glass partition, and there's the operatory right there. Now, it's also interesting, it looks like if you see the screens across the top here, you'll see this looks like here, like a camera looking down from the top in the surgical suite there, and looking down at perhaps a diseased organ with perhaps a tumor that needs to be excised. Next to that, you'll see the individuals in the operatory. Could be the anesthesiologist, could be the circulating nurse, or a surgical tech. But on the screen, you can see what's happening right there in the room. And you could be anywhere, actually, anywhere in the hospital or at any other location seeing the same sorts of things if it were part of the medical education. It looks over here like this is what a physician might see through a scope, perhaps a laparoscope. And down below here, it looks like ultrasound to me with various information given there. When the surgeon looks up, he sees these monitors here. It looks like vital signs, perhaps, are being maintained here, perhaps EKG readings. And again, some of the other information that you see up here on the screen. Now, don't forget, all this information can and is probably digitally stored and can be sent anywhere concurrently and in the future, if necessary. You'll also notice another computer over here, which could be utilized for a number of different things, including bringing up different records of the patient if necessary, or perhaps looking up other information, perhaps running over here to WebMD and seeing, what might be a good next step, whatever. But this is the world that we're living in now, and California is making some huge strides. They have 5 medical centers that are pulled together. They're doing some great work in the advancement of telemedicine. And by the way, I'd like to just freeze frame for a moment and talk a little bit about what I hope to accomplish today with you in this presentation. First off, I had a sabbatical experience in 2005. I feel very fortunate in that I was supported by this university to engage in the area of telemedicine. I happen to have a legal background as well as having a healthcare administration and executive background. And I had some exposure to telemedicine in a couple of places that I worked. Years ago in the 1980s, I worked at Chelsea Community Hospital near Ann Arbor, and when we were putting in our mobile CT service, I remember realizing how fantastic it was that images that were taken at Chelsea Community Hospital could be sent to specialists anywhere, literally, and have the readings done off-site. I remember talking with a radiologist one day, and he was saying it's just too bad at that time that fluoroscopy and other modalities were not as good to send elsewhere because there was degradation, 5 to 10% of images that were sent. In other words, it wasn't yet digital. But we've come a long way. We now are in the situation where community hospitals, like our local community hospital, can actually have their images of any of the diagnostic imaging procedures read anywhere else in the world. In fact, the system that they use locally is that they will send images that were taken later in the day. Perhaps a physician orders pictures to be taken at 5 o'clock at night. And unlike the old days, where you waited until the radiologist came the next morning and read the pictures, and then perhaps the report wasn't ready until later in the afternoon of the next day, these images that are taken today are sent across the ocean to Australia. A group of radiologists who are, it's a day shift over there and it's our night shift here, are reading those pictures, sending their interpretations back right away, and it's considered a first read. So then when the radiologists do arrive the next day, they're looking at those interpretations and then seeing if they validate them or else have a different conclusion. But it's information that's readily available. Now, if you happen to be the doctor in the emergency room working with a trauma patient and you need that CAT scan information right away, and it could well be life and death, having that first read from radiologists across the ocean is a very, very good thing. So, in my time, I've seen quite a few changes occur with the technology and what that means in terms of quality of patient care. And I'm just really, really excited with all the developments that have been occurring, and I'll be sharing some more of that with you as we go through this. Well, back to my sabbatical. When I started my sabbatical, I knew that there were significant impediments to the advancement of telemedicine. From my preliminary research and with discussions with individuals, I knew that some of the impediments included a lack of reimbursement for most of the things that are done on telemedicine. The Medicare program, for example, has been very hesitant to pay for various kinds of telemedicine procedures. Significant progress has been made in the area of radiology, in pathology, dermatology, but for the most part, there has been a real hesitancy to open up the floodgates, I think, in the minds of the payors, particularly the Medicare program, and a hesitancy at least until you could show real efficacy. And so it's been sort of a struggle for those people working in telemedicine to keep proving the case, that quality can be improved, that by having consultants help from afar, that could be a really good thing for patients and somehow also be cost effective. Again, there's the fear that, wow, would this just be an easy way for consultants to make a lot of extra money, et cetera. So there's that issue. Then you have the whole issue of liability. And of course, physicians and practitioners everywhere are continuously concerned about the potential of malpractice suits. Interestingly enough, my research has shown there aren't really all that many suits out there related to telemedicine, at least as yet. It could be that the plaintiff's bar has not really connected with that piece of it yet, but it's interesting that as of this date, there's almost nothing out there related to lawsuits involved with malpractice and telemedicine. Then you have the whole issue of privacy and security. And before the HIPAA regulations, that was a huge issue, largely undefined. It was left up to the states and their case law and some statutory law that helped define that. But today we're much, much further along with the HIPAA regulations. And so there are specialists certainly in that area, but that was an area that I chose not to focus on. Instead, for my sabbatical experience, I wanted to somehow help in the area of mitigating the barriers that exist in the area of licensure for practitioners. Now, as it stands today, when a physician treats a patient, that physician is licensed to do so in one state, and it's one state at a time. So that if a doctor in, say, Mount Pleasant wanted to treat a patient over the phone, using email, whatever, who happened to be located in Toledo, just a short drive away, unless that doctor is licensed in the state of Ohio, he or she could be in violation of the licensure law. And of course, in this modern age that we're living in, with the internet, telemedicine, and all the benefits that come from the computer technology, the geographic boundaries that exist by state licensure is almost anachronistic. So, and the telemedicine practitioners feel that acutely. We'll be talking about how that's handled today, state by state, but it seems like a relic of the past, and there should be a better way to handle that particular issue. And so I got involved in that area. When I went to Richmond and had a chance to see the Meditech, it's the, we'll be talking about that just shortly. I also had the benefit of being in the Commonwealth of Virginia's capital, Richmond. So while there, I had the chance to talk with a number of people who I was introduced through Dr. Ron Merrill, who is the director of the program there that I'd mentioned, and including the chief of technology for the state of Virginia, and had a chance to brainstorm and talk through the issues, particularly the public policy and the legal issues. And as a result of many conversations with Virginia Public Health, with people in Washington through the Office of Advancement of Technology and other folks, a potential solution seemed to surface that could help advance the cause. And again, I'll be talking about that just very shortly. As a result of my sabbatical experience, I have been very fortunate. I had 2 articles, one article that has been published already, and another that's soon to be published. And I'll be talking about that as we advance through the slides now. Also, as I said, I had some exposure to the Virginia Commonwealth program, the UC Davis program, but also the University of Michigan program in Ann Arbor. And so if time allows, I have some application examples that I'd like to show at the end, but I will be focusing mainly on the Virginia Commonwealth experience and some of the neat things that they've done over there. Okay, when we talk about the generation of digital information, we talk about audio, video, data, images, etc. Anything to do with relevant information, it's all possible digitally. Then the processing of information. You can take that information, you can compress it, consolidate it, encrypt it to maintain privacy and security and so forth. And here's the outline of today's presentation that I was looking for actually 3 slides ago. Wonderful. Okay, let's see if I forgot anything. As I said, I will be talking a bit about my sabbatical experience and so forth, but I also want to point out that I'd like to share the definition of telemedicine and the components of it, but then also just briefly talk about some of the history of telemedicine. Fascinating how things have advanced over the years. And then you see the rest of it there, the various programs that I was looking at, and then the real meat of my discussion today, the legal, international, and public policy implications. So we store information, and we can manipulate that data when we store it too. An interesting area that's just growing fantastically is the whole area of data mining. In fact, Central Michigan University has really advanced things in this area where you can take huge amounts of information and start drawing inferences by manipulating the data and seeing if there are trends and hidden meanings that can be found through data mining. You can transport digital information. Of course, wired communication networks, very common, but now wireless communications are absolutely fantastic. We'll be talking about some bioterrorism things in just a few seconds, but that really shows how much versatility and promise there is in this area, while at the same time the specter of security continues to raise its ugly head. Here's a picture just of a typical sort of telemedicine consult. A lot of community hospitals have this set up already. This is a specialist right here, and he's engaged with conversation at some remote location. This could be the Upper Peninsula, for example. And you have a practitioner up in the remote location with a patient. Here's the specialist going through the information, talking live with those folks on the other end, because there's a camera here taking his picture, and it shows up here on the screen too. So he sees himself even while he's engaging in conversation, and at the other end, the same thing is happening. So the specialist is free to ask questions, asked to have certain things done with the patient, and this person serves sort of as the eyes and ears, and maybe even the interpreter of things that are going on site for this person over here who could be located, say, in Ann Arbor or Columbus or someplace else. At Virginia Commonwealth University, they have a very robust connection with NASA, and they've done a lot of really neat things with grants, and this was one of them here. This was a project related to bioterrorism and disaster response training. And what they've done here, the goal here, was to give as much information as possible, two-way communication to the first responders, and that's represented by the folks here in this picture. You see the ambulances, and they get these people to the scene, and you'll see the PDAs that are shown here and how they are involved in the process. I've seen this, it's really pretty neat. The PDA is actually worn on the arm, and although for some things they have to touch the screen, it's a little bit cumbersome because they actually wear gloves very often when they're dealing with what could be terrorism victims. It could be like a smallpox situation or something infectious. So they have to have their hazmat suits on and protected. But they also have the capability of talking to the PDA and the PDA responding to the oral commands. So then there's a Wi-Fi connection, and then there's a regional command and control center that's in complete charge of this. They can send out other response vehicles, police, et cetera, and it's all being done. Now those PDAs are absolutely invaluable because they can provide information on the spot that may be necessary, as well as with products that we have now that are really pretty common, with cell phones, with PDAs and so forth, providing another source of communication. So we also have displaying of digital information, high definition displays, real-time displays, as we saw in the operatory. Now this right here is a picture that was taken in Chesterfield, Virginia, and Dr. Merrill was involved with a case. He was actually removing a gallbladder 20 miles away in the Virginia Commonwealth University on their campus. And Dr. Merrill has actually performed surgical procedures in Richmond on patients in Eastern Europe. And I was, again, allowed to manipulate the machinery one day by one of the post-grad fellows, and that was a lot of fun. But it was mind-blowing to me to be thinking about a procedure being controlled in the States, and the patient actually, I think it was Romania, where those patients were being treated. But in any event, VCU has connections with various places around the world, but they've been especially interested in the areas of Ecuador and Russia and Romania with various projects that they've worked on. Okay, then we have the management of digital information. Report writing is extremely important. What we're getting at is taking huge masses of information and data, and bringing it down to useful information. That's a trick sometimes, or very often. That's the real challenge. And so that's what real management is all about. Back to the World Health Organization, the next segment talks about medical services and information. These are just some examples. The imaging technologies we talked about a little while ago, the PACS system now in diagnostic imaging is really a system where paper and reports and film are a thing of the past. Now all this information is kept digitally. You can forward it on to proper clinicians who need to see it and so forth. You can send the information home with the patient on a DVD. So it's really, really fantastic how far this has advanced. We have smart cards that keep all pertinent information on individuals. In Europe, this is very common now. People have their medical history on a card that they can carry with them. When you think about the advantages of showing up in the emergency room, for example, and the doctor being able to quickly scan your card and seeing what your allergies are and other issues from your past, could be very, very important in a number of situations. There are smart clothes being developed now. The military has advanced in this in a tremendous way, where there's continuous reading of your vitals and other information that may be important for your medical well-being built in literally into the fabric of your clothes. And they say that will become very common into the future. And of course, the medical consultation from afar that we talked about. Now, we're talking about sending information from one location to another. So, like the operatory situation, it could be one room away. Or it could be from that ambulance in the field to the emergency room doctor a few miles away. Could be the medical conference in one country with attendees in another part of the world in a different country. It could be at a ship at sea to hospitals thousands of miles away. Again, I remember when I was at Chelsea Hospital in the 80s, the US Navy would typically have the capability to send images and pathology specimens, et cetera, over satellite communication to other locations like Walter Reed in Washington, D.C. They've been sort of the leader in a lot of these things, but literally you could be in the Indian Ocean and you have a medical emergency with a seaman, and all that coordination of the care and maybe interpretation of tests can be done via satellite many, many thousands away. And finally, from a spaceship to planet Earth. And the reason why I put that in there is that once we get past this little section here, we'll be talking a little bit about some of the NASA work that the Virginia Commonwealth has done. Here is a picture that's becoming fairly common in hospitals today. This is all within the same hospital. You have a nurse talking with the physician here that could be a critical care nurse, and they're having a live video conversation. Again, you see the camera up on top there, and again, this doctor is located somewhere in house having this live conversation about one of the patients in house. kind of interesting, back here, I just noticed that this morning, it looks like there's a patient on the computer probably getting a second opinion even while this is going on. Okay, here are some key applications. The dawn of telemedicine, the very first practical application is credited to one Cecil Whitson from the Nebraska Psychiatric Institute of the University of Nebraska. And there, the focus was psychiatric patient care and medical education. Group therapy was quite common in these early applications, and medical school classrooms were connected. They were watching the senior physicians dealing with groups of patients. At that time, we were using television cameras, and by the way, the POTS methodology is still very common today and very useful. That's the plain old telephone system. But even today, you may have noticed earlier when we had the specialist talking to the patient and the doctor at a distance, there was a telephone sitting right there. And from quite a few of these consultations that I had the privilege of sitting in on, the telephone was very valuable. Usually it started the whole engagement, but oftentimes, hate to say it, but the technology failed in one way or another. Perhaps the video portion went down or whatever. You can still get on the phone and have a pretty good transaction even with that sort of a problem. Then in 1968, in Boston, Massachusetts, Logan Airport connected with Massachusetts General Hospital, and they had a microwave video link with the airport. And the whole idea there was to have immediate access to a physician if there was ever an issue related to travelers who were there at Logan Airport. And over time, they had over 1,000 patient examinations performed using that methodology. Then in 1986, satellite networking came to the fore, non-military, and this was between Canada and East Africa. This was set up between Newfoundland and Kenya and or Uganda. Sometimes both countries were connected, sometimes one or the other. And this provided medical education, telemedicine consultations, including EEGs, and then various opportunities for collaboration and research. That's a common result of just getting people and entities together. Once you start talking, it's amazing how fertile the areas of research can be. This is one of my favorites, and this is one I'm putting in here because I came across it in my research, and it really struck me about what a small world we really live in today. Back in 1994, a student in China, Zhu Ling, was very sick, and her co-students were concerned about her because the medical professionals in China could not come up with a solution. She was slowly dying. And so her friends went to the internet, and wherever they could were asking medical opinions, and they were getting opinions from literally Europe and America and elsewhere. And it was interesting because there was a collaborative effort. These physicians and other clinicians really went to work on it, and they came to consensus that this person's probably suffering from a poisoning. And it turned out, and it was thallium poisoning that they were diagnosing here. And as it turned out, the good news is her life was saved. She, in fact, had been poisoned. But it's a real whodunit mystery that exists even to today. If you want to take a look at the internet sometime, it's really interesting because the Chinese government has said they think they know how she was poisoned, and they think it was purposeful, and they think they may have a suspect, but that suspect has never been arrested. So it's a real mystery as to what is really going on there. Unfortunately, Zhu Ling suffered some damage and is not in perfect condition today, but she is alive today. And finally, in terms of applications, just really quickly now, I'll go through some of the VCU stuff as related to NASA. Here's the group of Virginia Commonwealth, and this person right here is Dr. Merrill. I working? This is Dr. Rafiq, and we have various postgraduate fellows here from China, from Romania, from Russia, and here we have an extraterrestrial who's there to help out this day. That they've done many projects that involve astronauts in a hostile and a remote environment. And when you think about the issues that would be involved of trying to monitor the health care of your astronauts, perhaps deep into space, and then being able to deal with issues that present themselves at that remote location is a very impressive set of, presents an impressive set of challenges. So I'll just go ahead, I'll just show some pictures here. This is out west. You'll see here that this the satellite communication right there. They can communicate with anyone in the world. Here's all the things that an astronaut needs carried with them in terms of their own, keeping their own health state, regardless of the situation in space, as well as being able to fulfill their mission. This is the VPAC here, and this is the heart and soul of or the brains, actually, I should say, of their sensoring equipment. And so lots of data comes in. There's archived, analyzed, and then there's continuous communication to the remote site on planet Earth. Here's a picture of the sensors that they had placed, and you'll notice that this right here is a cooling garment right here, and you have to be careful not to rip that. So the sensors are actually placed here in the foot beneath that cooling garment, and you're doing everything from measuring skin temperature, pulse oximetry, all sorts of physiological sensors right there in the foot and within the suit itself. And then from this research, there's a lot of work that has been done in terms of application in the civilian sector then. So here's a person wearing a passive system monitoring for signs of hypoglycemia. And here's another picture of it, EKG, skin impedance, and so forth. This is really interesting to me. Diabetes monitoring. The actual sensors are here in the wristband, but when there is an alert that's given, it is transmitted to a computer somewhere. The computer keeps active records of the condition of the individual, but alerts can be sent out, like to a telephone, to a clinician, or to a family member of an individual. So the applications there are just fantastic. And then, in terms of being helpful for assisted living situations, you can monitor activity, location of individuals, of course, using GPS and so forth. When you think of walkaways from nursing homes, et cetera, being able to track people immediately is a very, very good thing. Monitoring vital signs, et cetera. And then also the kinds of individuals who could really benefit from these monitoring devices. Alzheimer patients, people with neurological injuries, people with congestive heart failure, diabetes, arrhythmia, sleep pathology, falls. We're very much engaged in research here now with understanding falls of senior citizens. Of course, monitoring and telemedicine very helpful there, et cetera. I am going to just sort of jump ahead a little bit, or just quickly through this. When the earthquake occurred in Pakistan, both Doctors Rafiq and Merrill responded with the NASA folks and actually put equipment and other resources in Pakistan to help out the 3.5 million people who were rendered homeless because of the earthquakes. Here's Dr. Rafiq working with a patient at a mobile site in Pakistan, and he is a Pakistani too, originally, by the way. This right here is a little blurry, but it was taken from their website with their permission. This is what a typical home might look like after the earthquake occurred. And you can see just the rubble and the devastation. Now multiply that many times over, and the terrible destruction is just very evident. NASA came in and helped put in some special equipment to help, especially with crush injuries that occurred from the falling concrete, occurred by the earthquake. And this is one of the stations right here, and it looks a lot like a MASH station, you know, from the popular TV series from the Korean War. But that was set up very rapidly and was helping people out just shortly after all that had occurred. Now I'm going to switch over to the dark side of telemedicine. Various states have prosecuted people for practicing medicine without a license on the internet. Okay, and it manifests itself in lots of different ways. You can get on the internet and you can buy antibiotics, for example, or Viagra, or tonics of any sort on the internet. And the problem here is it's worldwide. It goes beyond our borders. So when you start thinking about the negative side of telemedicine, here it is right here. So bad that the National Association of State Attorneys General formed a task force so that they could get federal level permission to go after suspected offenders of their various state licensure and fraud and consumer protection laws. Consumers need to learn to act cautiously, that's for sure. They need to ask, to be discerning and to ask the right questions. For example, is that a licensed pharmacy that is trying to sell me something on the internet, or a sham operation of unknown location? Is that a licensed physician that I'm communicating with on the web, or an imposter? How do you know? Is that a legitimate and reputable company trying to entice me to buy a healthcare product, or a fraudulent enterprise purposely attempting to evade regulatory oversight? So now we get into enforcement of state licensure law. There are physicians who practice telemedicine across state lines without the benefit of a medical license in those states in which the patients are located, and they've been found to be in violation of state licensure law. And by the way, it's where the patient is located. That's the jurisdiction in which the offense will be heard in court. There are also situations where a physician has actually practiced out of his or her specialty, like an orthopod selling a drug for a drug company, like the virility drug Viagra. And that physician can be found subject to monetary penalty and even loss of licensure in the state that they're practicing in. Now that's really interesting because in the past, the widest professional license possible really belongs to the physicians. Doctors do what doctors do. So you can have somebody who's basically a family care physician delivering babies, doing procedures in their office, surgical procedures, et cetera, et cetera. The law, in fact, doesn't say, the licensure law doesn't say, that a family care doctor can't do open heart surgery. Now, the insurance company for that individual certainly would come into play there, as well as any facility that person may have medical staff privileges, but it's a very wide berth given to medical practitioners. Here you have a situation where an orthopedic surgeon was actually given a monetary sanction for helping to prescribe Viagra on the net. In any event, there are many companies that are out there that help doctors process the paperwork and get state licensure. And there's one company that I've listed here, and it was in my article. They charge $499 per physician per state with a multiple state quote available to those who practice telemedicine. So for you, $429, you know. License of practitioners. Supreme Court has held that as a matter of individual that it is a matter of individual state jurisdiction related to the licensure. And so what that means is the states have a wide variety of approaches in terms of how they do license their practitioners. There are various models that exist. One is full licensure, which just simply says if you're going to practice medicine in our state, you have to have full and unrestricted license if you want to consult, diagnose, treat patients, etc. Very straightforward, and actually the AMA is actually a fan of this approach. Then there's recognition of licensure policies of one state by another. There's endorsement, mutual recognition, or reciprocity. I have a license to practice law in the state of Michigan. I've had it since 1983, and since 1992, I've been licensed in Illinois also because they have a reciprocity arrangement between the states. I just had to have 2 judges write a letter of recommendation for me when I was a CEO of a hospital in Illinois, and I had an FBI check. But other than that, I did not have to take the bar exam over again, and that's getting to this issue of reciprocity here. Now, a lot of states have a consultation exception. So say a physician trained in Texas, and he's practicing today in Michigan, and so his contacts and perhaps specialists that he knows and trusts are in this other state, Texas. Well then, it's certainly permissible to consult from one state to another if the state licensure laws permit that. Sort of, you know, you don't do very many of these, it just happens sort of infrequently, and the primary responsibility stays with that primary care doctor, with the patient. Then there's special licensure that's advanced by the Federation of State Boards, and there are about 20 states that have this, and it's a more open possibility for licensure in general. I'll talk about that in just a minute. There's a 5th model, and that's a future possible model of national licensure. This doesn't exist in the US, except that when you have physicians in the armed forces, all they have to do is be licensed in one state, and they're authorized then to practice in any military facility in the United States or elsewhere in the world. Now, a national model, and this is where Peter Jacobson from University of Michigan comes in. He had proposed for full federal preemption, where they would allow, as related to licensing telemedicine, that there be a federal license for this. And a possible and perhaps less controversial approach might be partial federal preemption, similar to the Drug Enforcement Agency, allowing physicians to prescribe controlled substances, but which exists today, but the actual licensure for the practice still resides in the individual states. And our question in our article was, how realistic is it to push for national licensure? And although a number of commentators have said this would be really good, and by the way, the feds have been getting involved in things like physician-assisted suicide, prohibition of partial birth abortions, et cetera, that now we can just extend it to licensure. Our position was it's not realistic to push for national licensure, that there'd be stiff opposition, and there has been stiff opposition from the medical professional lobbies, various physician organizations, as well as state licensure boards. And the US Constitution has been tested many times. Through the 10th Amendment, the states clearly have the authority through their police power to ensure the safety of their citizenry, and in particular, to license medical professionals. And this is the article that was written, Telemedicine Licensure in the United States, the Need for a Cooperative Regional Approach. It will be appearing in the April edition of Telemedicine and eHealth. And we had 2 students. We had a graduate student, Amna Kamar, and Charles Toby, a graduate student, who helped us with the research in that article, along with Drs. Merrill and Rafiq. In that article, in that article, we talk about 2 governors' associations, the Western Governors Association and the Southern Governors Association, of various governors' associations. There are several, actually. These are the two that have done anything related to telemedicine. And the Southern Governors Association in particular has been more prominent. And you see the various states that belong to the SGA. They had a task force in 1999 look at improving the life of the South through telemedicine, and they specifically highlighted state licensure as an area in need of improvement. I'll just maybe get to the quick of it. What we're proposing is that if we can't mandate that states work together in terms of reciprocity and recognizing telemedicine, what if we had real leadership that was provided through a governor's association? The governor setting the vision, setting the bar, and challenging each of the states to get involved and develop a system that works for their geographic area. Maybe it's 11 states or whatever, but they could work together and help set the standards for a unified licensure approach, as well as perhaps setting standards, identifying what the standard of care is, but also identifying equipment and other sorts of standards that should be considered. There's precedence for this. The Uniform Commercial Code was developed through a group called the National Conference of Commissioners, and that's how contract law has developed in this country, state by state. States have adopted a unified common approach to licensure, for contractual issues, all except the state of Louisiana, which is odd in compared to the other states in that they follow the Napoleonic Code as opposed to common law that the rest of the states follow. So the application was not as pronounced there. Finally, I'd like to finish up talking about some of the economic and international considerations of telemedicine. It has been posited that $15 to $20 billion could be saved if we had a unified system in our country. And another individual had expressed the opinion before that the export of U.S. medical expertise could fund our domestic healthcare system with the use of telemedicine. Other countries see telemedicine as an opportunity for their economic interests. Countries like Malaysia, they're linking all of their state and district hospitals throughout their nation on a common virtual private network, and they want to sell their services worldwide. Australia has been cited as a country that has unified their effort to sell their expertise worldwide. And in one of the articles we looked at, a Canadian said, in 2004, when Canada opened its remote robotic surgical operation in Hamilton, Ontario, the U.S. quietly fell to the number 2 position in the hierarchical world of medical technology. For Canada, this was no small feat, especially considering that Canadian healthcare dollars are scarce and that Canada's healthcare delivery system has been under stress for some time. And then the other article that we have is the global outsourcing of medical expertise, opportunities and issues. And in that article, we talk about the problem of outsourcing as it exists. It's estimated that 14 million American jobs will potentially be outsourced. We talked about the dilemma of having impediments such as licensure issues in this country that impede us from being as strong a competitor on the world market as we could be. That was presented in Moscow last year through the Global Business and Technology Association. And I think, in consideration of the time, I can probably stop here and entertain any questions, if we have any. Yes?
I have a patient that I have a lot of patients that go to Florida during the winter. Let's say the patient has not had
Please use the mic.
an infarct or just angina. She sees the cardiologist, he does the implant, the stent, but doesn't put the patient on Plavix, and I want that patient on Plavix. Legally, can I call the pharmacist in Florida and say, I want this patient on Plavix?
You know, you'd have to first off look, like I said, every state is different. And the first thing you'd have to, I assume you're not licensed in Florida to begin with, right? All right, so you have that as the very first issue. And you've talked with the physician there, and that person is in disagreement with you. That is a tough issue. I don't have an easy answer for that one, except that if your question is, can you call the pharmacy and override? the pharmacist will ask you where you're from, and that individual would note the dilemma also at that juncture. So hopefully with the pharmacist you can work something out with the, but in terms of your right to override the Florida physician, I would say you'd be on pretty soft ground right there.
It's on so they can hear it.
In regards to patient safety, how much has that become an issue when diagnosing and prescribing medication, like within telemedicine?
Well, that's an interesting point. That's exactly what the AMA talks about. If the AMA doesn't have so much a problem with using technology if the physician has a personal relationship, a face-to-face relationship with that patient. But if you're talking about doctors who are consulting and working with patients that they've never seen, is that what you're getting at? Okay. They're saying that there could be very big safety and quality issues related to that. So again, that starts to tend towards the dark side of telemedicine, and that's why there needs to be good controls. In our article, we talked about that, and we talked about the need for setting ground rules that practitioners in general can live with and feel good about.
Dr. Cwick, before we finish, we have one question from one of our viewers out on the internet.
Oh, great.
And they ask, what do you see as having greater influence and impact on the proliferation of telemedicine, economic or legal issues?
Right now, it's both actually. You always follow the dollars, to see how things really work. And with the hesitancy of the payors to go too far with allowing teleconsultations and so forth, that's a problem because you can't ask the clinicians to just simply volunteer their time and provide their professional work, particularly when it takes away from other things that they're doing. So the economic side is very important, but we also have the legal side. Like I was talking about, the licensure issues are certainly there as well as privacy, security, and then the fear of lawsuits for the work that's done that way.
Thank you very much for your enlightening talk today, and thank you everyone for attending.